So today's reading is from Ernest Holmes, and he says, "Fear and faith are identical in that the energy used in the one is the same energy that is used in the other. Since there is but one final energy in the universe, and this final energy is the energy of thought. Faith is a positive acceptance that you shall experience that which you do not like. Faith is a positive acceptance that you shall experience that which you do like. But they are identical in this mental action. The only difference is in the direction." And so it is.
Have you ever noticed whenever you or anybody in the room is particularly angry or fearful, that the energy in the room changes? We got to know, from the audience. That kind of energy changes everything and affects everyone. Now, in a month whose theme is I love and ensure the stewardship of the planet, I believe that it would behoove us to really understand that kind of energy is simply one of the ways that we pollute the world around us. Because of that, I believe that it also behooves us, I love that word, to look at the energy of fear itself and what we can do, of us individually and collectively, to transcend that fear. So my talk title today is Transcending Fear. Now, in its most fundamental essence, fear is a defense mechanism. It is a set of preconditioned psychological and physiological responses designed to help us survive dangerous circumstances. And when the big alarm goes off in our head, we are left with three general categories of responses: fight, flight, or freeze. I'm sure that you've heard of them. Probably used them a time or two. Now, the state of consciousness called fight is direct resistance, force against force. Now, this could look like an actual physical struggle, or it could be a mental, emotional, or spiritual struggle. There may be situations in which fighting is the only remaining way or course of action for us. There may be. Last week, Ruth used the activities of a triathlon to talk about love in action. And I mentioned that when I was doing some triathlons earlier in the 80s, I was really young, that I really loved to climb the hills, but I really hated the downhill. I mean, really, come on, who hates the downhills? Nobody. But I did, because I was very afraid of the speed. I was very afraid of the skinniness of the tires. I was very afraid of the unpredictability of the road surfaces. And so what I tended to do from the moment I hit the crest of the hill to the bottom of it was to hold on to the brakes with all my might. And holding on to the brakes created that resistance, right? So fear, this is really like equating the fear with the resistance. It created the resistance that effectively slowed me down. Holding on to the brakes gave me a certain sense of safety. Although when I really think about it now, it was a false sense of security, because those road conditions were still just as unpredictable. An animal could have jumped out from the little forest areas along the side at any given moment, and the tires were still just as skinny as they always were, no matter what speed I was going. And when I look back at all of the hours that I spent on my bike, I realized that the only time I ever fell, the only time I was ever really in danger was when I was at a complete stop because of a red light and couldn't get out of my pedals. Boop. A car could have driven by and right over my head like a watermelon. Now, holding on to those brakes did not allow me to really experience the exhilaration of the moment. Holding on to those brakes didn't allow me to really experience what every other bike rider absolutely loves, the downhill. The trouble with the fight state of consciousness is once we have turned it on, it is very hard to switch off. Once we're in this all-consuming state of fight consciousness, we see nothing but things to fight against everywhere we look. Anger is the emotional representation of this state of consciousness of this fight. And this isn't very effective because, as we know, anger only begets anger, and violence only begets more violence. The trouble with the fight choice is that when we choose it time and time and time again, that inner resistance within us doesn't allow us to live our highest and best life. The state of consciousness known as flight typically happens when there is no way to directly resist opposing forces. Sometimes backpedaling is the only answer. Running away from danger has saved living creatures throughout all time. That they use it very often to get away from other predators right in the wild. The problem with the fight-flight state of consciousness, according to Brian Germain in his book, Transcending Fear, the Doorway to Freedom, is that once the flight consciousness is engaged, it tends to accelerate without cues from the environment. He says there is no signal from the world that all is clear and safe, that we can stop running now. This tends to result in panic itself becoming the enemy. When retreating into infinity becomes an undying urge to be somewhere other than where we are, we tend to burn out from our efforts. He told about a famous naturalistic observation study about deers, about a group of deer on an overpopulated island. The deer were constantly bumping into one another. That's how overpopulated it was. The lack of territory and personal space elevated the collective adrenaline level. You know, that adrenaline level that gets up when you are stressed out for a long period of time. So it elevated that baseline adrenaline level to a level that was completely unsustainable. The stress from the overpopulation eventually killed all of those deer, every single one of them. Now, I have my own little animal flight story to tell. For about a year, I lived in Benicia, California. It's in Northern California, about 30 miles east of San Francisco. And I lived in a little garden cottage house that was behind the main house in the back of it. I really loved living there. It was great. Benicia was wonderful for biking. Don, you would really love it. I had a kind of a fence-enclosed patio right outside of my door. And it was a really lovely place to take time to just sit out there during the evening after a really long day at work. So one evening I was sitting out there. I was barefoot. I was having a glass of wine and just chilling. At some moment in time, I closed my eyes and just allowed this light little breeze that was happening to just wash over me. And while my eyes were still closed, I felt this pressure on my top of my foot. But it went away right away until the next one came. Then another pressure on my foot, and I all of a sudden felt that fear come up in me. And as I opened my eyes, I saw a possum that was continuing to walk across that patio after it had just stepped across my foot. Twice. Woo! I can still feel it now. I jumped up so fast, panicked, just panicked, and I ran in and I locked the door. Really, I locked the door. Like, was that possum going to follow me back into the house or something? I locked the door. I'm telling you, fear makes you do some crazy, really irrational things at some time. And to top it all off, I got no cue from the outside world that the danger was gone. And so I stayed locked up in my house the entire night. A little bit worried about going out the next morning. I missed a lovely evening out on my patio. Flight. Having exhausted all other options, animals tend to sit still and just wait until the danger passes. This is a state of consciousness known as freeze. Now, this instinct allows animals to evade predators out in the wild. For us, there's also could be a time and a place when hiding and waiting until the danger passes is our best option. But like fight and flight, the state of freeze is not easy to shut off. And Brian Germain even says that for him, it is the most dangerous of all of these states of consciousness. The most dangerous. He says it leads us to close ourselves off from the world. Our muscles stiffen, leaving us less able to act. Action is necessary. Freezing is not a choice, but a habit. And a habit that we might choose again and again. I mean, if you even think about it, right? What is the ultimate end to that would be like a catatonic state. He says it's the most dangerous. Now, true, there are moments, there really are moments in life when we encounter genuinely dangerous circumstances. Life can often present us with some particularly vivid situations in which our reaction determines whether we live or die. And it is in such moments that our approach creates a fork in the road. It creates a fork in the road between whether we are able to solve a problem or whether we panic and actually about the worst case scenario. Our repeated habitual patterns of instinct are like a prison. They lead us to experience only what we have in the past. We keep unconsciously going to them again and again. Brian Germain says, transcending fear is no different from the transcendence of any other thought. We simply let it go. Easy for him to say. The trouble is, most of the time we find ourselves so infatuated with the story of our experience that there is no apparent way to let it go. When we define the plot as real, all other possibilities become eclipsed. So he suggests a three-prong approach to transcending our fear. Relax, focus, and flow. In order to alter the escalation of our fear, the first step is always the same. We have to find a way to relax. We have to. While this is not always easy, even acting calm, just acting calm, has the ability to transform a moment of panic into a workable reality. We don't have direct control over our heart rate or our blood pressure or the chemical changes that occur when we are experiencing fear. But we do have control over our respiration through the conscious manipulation of it. So when we experience fear, our breathing becomes very shallow and rapid. The technique to create the most effective and the greatest effect on our emotional state is to take in a deep breath and then to exhale it very slowly. Do it with me. Breathe in deep and let it go very slowly. You can feel it. This allows our body to become relaxed. And when we relax, we create space. And space is where we find solutions, is where we recognize that we have options. The second prong is focus. Now, if we were to be completely honest with ourselves, we might have to admit that we can often tend to catastrophize many of the situations that we find ourselves within. Our minds spin with all of these negative possibilities, all of the negative possibilities that we can think up, all of the negative possibilities that have not happened yet. But because our mind is focused on these possibilities, we do subtle things that actually allow these kinds of, and create the possibility for these possibilities to actually happen, to show up. We can tend to project our negative expectations out into the world. And because that is we have our focus on, we literally create a self-fulfilling prophecy. We bring into our lives those things which we don't want. And the truth is that had we not been really thinking about all those negative expectations, we would have had the space to really recognize that there may have been really many other options for us. The invitation of this prong is to consider the possibility that there are steps that we can take and solutions that we can find so that we don't have to play out the worst case scenario. The bottom line, and I know you're just not, somebody in here is not going to like this, but the bottom line is that the environment is neutral. Environment is neutral. What the environment simply reflects our inner experience. It reflects what we are focused most upon. The invitation is observe the situation, the circumstances without all manipulative thought that we have going on in our minds. When we do this, we will be able to see the world as it is. This is the nature of true focus. Brian Germain says, perfect focus is an unlabeled observation of the present moment. This is how we get in sync with the situation. This is how we find our way through danger. We open our eyes and we pay attention. In order to move through or transcend the fear, we're also encouraged to really stay in the now moment. When we project ourselves and the situation out into the future, then in all probability, we're not going to really be able to see that fear is simply, as the acronym says, false evidence appearing real. If we stay centered in the now, we will more likely be able to accept what is and to know that this too shall pass. We may be able to surrender our fear and to deal with the reality of the present moment in a more powerful way. The invitation is to rein in our imagination. Now, not always. Imagination is an awesome thing, but in this moment, rein in that imagination. The one that's moved to the worst case scenario, right? Let go of the fear and take some action in the moment. When we choose to take some action and to face the fear and realize that the situation is very rarely as horrible as we imagined it was going to be, then the fear becomes weaker. The third prong is flow. Now, in this context, flow is a state of consciousness that is absolutely perfect. An athlete might call it being in the zone. Regardless of the name, it is a complete moment. Nothing is missing, and nothing about that moment needs to be changed or any different in any way. It doesn't need to be fixed. It is perfect. There's nothing occurring, and there's no thoughts within our head that do not actually contribute or support our success. Everything else just falls away. Flow is the space where we go to let go of our fears and doubts and worries. It's a complete acceptance of what is going on. When we are in the state of flow, we fully cooperate with the moment. When we're in the state of flow, we are in a state of peace. When we are in the state of flow, everything else drops away and there is only the task at hand. It's a mindset that sees no obstacles, only the path ahead. It's here that we can really do amazing things, in that space. It's here that we can find solutions that may not have been present before to our minds or to our eyes. It's here that we are really able to harness all of our power. Fear is being in resistance to the flow of the moment. It focuses our attention in a direction that is opposite of the flow. And it moves us out of the center of the flow. The invitation is to wake up to the present moment, to assess the situation and to flow with what is actually happening without that voice overlay, that insistent chatter that goes on. If we are to stay in the flow, we have to be able to access our highest self. That's self with a capital S. From there, we can really see all solutions, and we can take action from a place of power and freedom. There is sanity at the core of each of the primal responses of fight, flight, or freeze. In certain situations, they still may be the right and perfect plan of action. However, they were really sculpted for a very different world. In the past, these instincts were absolutely necessary for survival. However, in our modern world, we often fear situations where the stakes are not as high, and yet our bodies and our minds continue to treat these situations as though they were still a threat. Fear is something that, I believe that most of us have felt at some time or another in our lives. Some of us may have had a life or death experience happen that was very similar to the experience that our ancestors, caveman and women times, might have experienced, right? We might have had that experience, but not all situations are those kinds of experiences. Fear often just lurks in the shadows when we have to make a big decision, or when we have to have a difficult conversation, or when we are trying to step out of our comfort zone. Oh, there it is. There it is. Now, in order to transcend these types of fears, the invitation is to become aware of our fears. To not just be on that autopilot where we are reacting unconsciously, but to become more aware of them. When we become more aware of what our fears are, we become more powerful to deal with them. Once we become more aware of our fears, we need to do the inner work in order to understand them more fully. This is one of the most powerful things that we can do to transcend our fear. When we can identify it and name it and translate it into words, it becomes very specific and not overwhelming. The invitation is to be quiet, go within, take a deep breath, ask our inner wisdom, what is my fear and what is its purpose? And then listen for the answer. Each of us needs to discern what sets our fear. Clearly, possums, for me. Knowing what we are afraid of and why can be one of the best ways to really be able to transcend that fear. Knowing what we are afraid of and why can assist us to really be able to find the lesson or the gift in that particular experience, and to know that it is exactly what we needed to go through in order to grow and evolve. In order to move through our fear, we're also encouraged to use our spiritual practices, the spiritual practices that we talk about and do here of meditation, prayer, and positive affirmations. Getting quiet, closing our outer eyes, taking a deep breath, and turning within allows us to tap into the truth of our being. It allows us to know beyond a shadow of a doubt that we are connected to and tapped into the greatest power that there is. And that whenever we are thinking and taking action from that place, then anything is possible. The use of spiritual mind treatment or affirmative prayer to know and to powerfully speak the truth, and then to allow the power and presence of God to move through and as us, as courage and strength and divine right action, is also another really powerful way to transcend our fears. And if you are finding that you can't do that within yourself, then get some prayer. Because there is somebody that can know that truth for you and can assist you. And you, if you've never experienced, will be amazed at how much better you feel. When we feel fear around an experience, the invitation is to take a moment and to think about something good that could come out of that experience, rather than immediately and directly going to all of the bad things that you don't want to happen. If our thoughts and our beliefs are creating the experiences of our lives, which I believe that they do, then all of these negative thoughts create this self-fulfilling prophecy. So the invitation is to switch our perspective from something negative to something more positive, and to imagine our lives beyond the fear. Because what we know and believe here is that what we focus on grows in our lives. Ernest Holmes says, we literally need to change ourselves if we wish to transcend fear and change things around us. It is the foundation of what we teach. Now is the time to truly begin to live, change your thinking, change your life. So the invitation today is to know that we have the power within us to transcend our fear and to choose to do it in each and every situation that we encounter. When we do so, we encourage other people to do so. I mean, just imagine what it would be like if we were to live in a world where everyone routinely, consciously chose to transcend their fears. It's a choice. It's a choice that we can make. It is a choice that can heal the planet. And so it is. So it is. So it is to turn within. With my eyes closed and my attention turned inward, I am acutely aware of the power and presence within me and surrounding me. I recognize it as choice, free will, divine right action, peace, joy, courage, strength. I know that it is who and what I am because it is of God. It is of God, then I am a representative of that. And just as I know that this is true for me, I know that it is true for each and every person here today, each and every person within the sound of my voice, each and every person on the planet. It could be no other way. And it is from that place of deep connection, connected to each other through that golden thread of God stuff that weaves itself throughout all of life, that I know that there is a way that we can live our lives tapped into, deeply grounded in, completely focused upon that core of our being. That when we do so, we act from our highest self. We act with the strength of the power and presence of God behind us. When we act from that place, there is nothing more powerful than we are. All of our fears fall away. downhill or possum or anything else could ever create that panic again. I claim ease and grace for us around finding that moment of rest, taking that deep breath, letting it out long and slow, allowing ourselves to create the space to find the solutions that I know beyond a shadow of a doubt exist. For right where we are, all possibility exists. I claim ease and grace for each of us around staying in that flow, around finding and living from that place, being in the zone. Fear, false evidence appearing real. Not the truth. Not the truth of who we are, not the truth of life itself. Beyond the veil or the fog of the situation, the power and presence of God always exists. We can see beyond that veil to that presence. And allow it to smooth the rough and I'm so grateful to know this truth and to speak these words. So grateful for the power of prayer, knowing that these words are loosed into a law that only ever says yes. And so I speak them and I release them with love and gratitude and full expectation of their manifestation, letting go and letting God be God. And I invite each of us to anchor these words for ourselves and for each other simply by saying, and so it is. And so it is. Amen.